So what if I told you a gas station attendant could absolutely crush a Harvard-educated finance executive when it comes to investing? I know, it sounds kind of crazy, right? But believe it or not, the true story of how a janitor secretly piled up an $8 million fortune while a top exec went completely bankrupt, well, it reveals the single most important and honestly the most overlooked secret about money. And here's the thing, it has almost nothing to do with how smart you are and everything, literally everything, to do with how you behave.
Okay, so let's meet the two people at the center of this story. I mean, on the surface, they could not be more different. First up, you've got Ronald Reed, a really humble guy from rural Vermont. He spent his whole life doing things like fixing cars and sweeping floors. And then, on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have Richard Fuscone. This guy is a Harvard Business School grad, a top executive at the finance giant Merrill Lynch. You know, one is the picture of blue-collar simplicity, and the other is the definition of Wall Street sophistication.
But here's where the story takes a crazy turn. When Ronald Reed passed away in 2014, he was 92 years old. And this quiet, unassuming janitor, he made international headlines. Why? Because he left behind a secret fortune of over $8 million. And get this, he donated most of it to his local hospital and library. Just incredible. And that right there, that brings us to the absolute core puzzle we're going to unpack. How on earth is it possible? How could a janitor with a totally modest income build that kind of wealth, while the so-called finance expert Richard Fuscone declared bankruptcy, especially during a financial crisis that for some was a huge opportunity? So let's dive in and figure this out. All right, first up, let's get into the unbelievable true story, the janitor versus the executive. So Ronald Reed's strategy, it was almost shockingly simple. Seriously, he lived a really frugal life. He bought a small house and stayed there his entire life. He saved whatever he could from his paychecks, and they weren't big, and he just invested that money in solid blue-chip stocks. And then he did the hardest part. He just waited for decades. That's it. No complex formulas, no wild, risky bets. Just good old-fashioned patience and consistency. Now, Richard Fuscone, his life was the complete polar opposite. I mean, we're talking an 18,000 square foot mansion. It had 11 bathrooms, 2 swimming pools, and it cost him over $90,000 a month just to maintain. So how do you fund this? He borrowed. A lot. He took on immense debt. And when that 2008 financial crisis hit, his whole high-leverage world just came crashing down around him. He lost absolutely everything. And this is the fundamental lesson. This is the whole point. See, financial success isn't a hard science like physics, with all these unbreakable laws. It's a soft skill. It's all psychology. The gap between Ronald Reed and Richard Fuscone wasn't about knowledge or IQ. It was purely in their behavior. One guy was patient, the other was greedy. That's literally it. And that's the difference between having $8 million in the bank and filing for bankruptcy. So, what was the core behavioral flaw that caused all this? Well, it all starts with our first crucial psychological principle, the incredibly dangerous mindset of never enough. You know what I'm talking about? It's when the goalpost for what you want is always moving, always just a little further away. And that chase, it pushes people to take some really foolish risks. There's this fantastic story about the author Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22. He's at a party, and someone points out that the hedge fund manager hosting the party made more money in a single day than Heller's classic novel had made in its entire history. And Heller's reply is just brilliant. He says, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough." Wow. I mean, that skill, just knowing when you have enough, it's one of the most important things in finance. And it's exactly what guys like Richard Fuscone, tragically, totally lack. And that's really the key, isn't it? You see people who already have everything they could possibly need. A great reputation, freedom, friends, family, and they risk it all for something they absolutely do not need. They get sucked into this dangerous game of social comparison, where the ceiling is just so high it's basically unreachable. And the only way to win that game is to refuse to play it in the first place. Okay, so this leads us perfectly into our second big principle, which tackles a huge misconception we all have in our society. We tend to confuse being rich with being wealthy, but honestly, they are two completely different things. In fact, a lot of the time, they're opposites. So let's break it down. Being rich is all about your current income. It's the stuff you can see, the $100,000 car, the huge house, the designer clothes. Richness is loud, it's flashy. But wealth? Wealth is hidden. It's the income you don't spend. It's all those financial assets that are just quietly growing, compounding,
totally unseen by the outside world. Think about it. Spending money just to show other people how much money you have is literally the fastest way to have less money.
So real wealth is created by restraint. It's the nice cars you don't purchase. It's the diamonds you don't buy. It's the first-class upgrade you say no to. It's that quiet accumulation of assets. And Ronald Reed, he was the perfect example of this. Nobody had a clue he was a multimillionaire because his wealth was completely invisible. See, he was building wealth, not just showing off how rich he was. But look, building wealth isn't the whole story. Not even close. You also have to keep it. And this brings us to our third, really critical distinction. Getting wealthy and staying wealthy are two completely different skill sets. Getting rich, that often requires taking risks, being optimistic. But staying wealthy, that requires the total opposite, humility, and a healthy dose of paranoia that, you know what, it could all be taken away in a heartbeat.
There's a story that just perfectly captures this difference. There was a guy named Rick Guerin, an early partner of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. By all accounts, he was just as smart as they were. But in the market crash back in the 1970s, he got completely wiped out. So why? Simple. He had used a ton of debt to leverage his investments. He was in a huge hurry to get rich. And that rush, that impatience, it made him fragile.
And this really reveals Warren Buffett's true secret. It's not just about his genius for picking stocks. It's his longevity. It's the fact that he has been investing consistently for more than 3/4 of a century. Think about that. He survived every single recession, every crash, every market panic without getting knocked out of the game. Survival, it turns out, is maybe the single most underrated skill in all of finance. Because when you can survive for the long haul, you let the most powerful force in finance go to work for you: compounding. But compounding needs one thing more than anything else: time. It needs time to work its magic. Chasing these spectacular returns that you can't possibly sustain, well, that's a fool's game. The real path to wealth is much simpler. Earn pretty good returns that you can stick with for a very, very long time. So, what's the point of all this? I mean, if it's not about the giant houses and the fancy cars, what is the ultimate goal of building wealth anyway? Well, the answer is actually really simple but also profound. It's about one thing: control.
At the end of the day, the greatest value money can offer you isn't stuff. It's the ability to have control over your own time. The freedom to wake up in the morning and say, you know what? I can do whatever I want today. That is the highest dividend that money pays. It isn't luxury goods, it's autonomy. It's the freedom to maybe change your career, or to handle an emergency without financial stress, or just to spend unstructured time with the people you love. That, right there, is the true purpose of wealth. So, when you look at the stories of the janitor and the executive, it becomes crystal clear. Your financial destiny isn't written in the size of your paycheck or what degree is hanging on your wall. Nope, it's written in your actions, your patience, your humility, and your personal definition of enough. So the real question you have to ask yourself is this: is your behavior your biggest asset or your biggest liability? Because that answer is going to determine everything.